So I will start to talk, and the people will come when they hear me, or they will run away when they hear me. But anyway, something will happen. Um, I yeah, I will. We will come back to your piece of analysis when we have questions afterwards, so you can share your experience with coding and with commenting. And I will show you later how I did how I did coding and commenting of exactly these two pieces of texts you worked with. So you can compare your analysis with my way of analyzing. So we will do it later during the lecture. Uh, I will now take the turn from Tomáš, and I'll speak more about my concrete research project, and Tomáš will step in with some theoretical parts, theoretical explanations of the research process. I want to mention that this research I started it myself, and I did most of the time I worked on myself on alone, and then in later phases of the research, Tomáš has joined me and helped with the methodology, and also contributed to the analysis. So I will speak about my research, but I mean the research I started and Tomáš has joined. Here you can see a picture of one of my depressive clients, and I don't know why I put it here in the presentation. Probably just that you can experience a bit the mood they are in. Maybe you can also see this also one kind of sensitizing concept that I had, that a person is somehow going down into the depression and into a kind of vicious circle of depression, that they stay there in the depression, they can't go out. So you can see it nicely on the picture, how they go down and they got stuck in here. Okay, so I will lead you through the process of my research, and there were several steps that I did. Some of them were already theoretically explained by Tomáš. So I will go through the process and explain each step and demonstrate it, how I did it, and I will also invite you to participate somehow in it. The first step is to ask the research question. How my research question was born. First, I had experience working with depressive clients in a psychiatric hospital for 5, almost 6 years. I was working with them individually, and I also was leading groups with depressive clients. At the same time, I was working theoretically on the topic of depression. I was very much interested in the Gestalt approach applied to the specific clients, because the way I learned Gestalt approach was not working well with depressive clients, because when I was asking a depressive client, how do you feel? And could you feel a little bit more? It was not. Yeah, it was not working. So, or the results were different that I saw in my training. So, I became curious how to adopt change the Gestalt approach to the depressive clients, and I was writing some articles about that. And so I spent some years working, doing this, and then I burned out. I just got very tired physically, and I was not interested in the clients anymore. I was more interested in writing reports than working with clients. And after some time I realized, or actually my wife realized, that I was depressed myself. So this was my experience, and I had to make some changes because I didn't do good work in that time with my clients. So I changed my work. I left the hospital. I started to work in a private practice. I had only a few depressive clients, and I had more clients with different problems. And I also started to teach more and work less with clients. So I made some changes, and I also became interested in the process. How did it happen to me that I burned out, that I got depressive myself? Because I did all the things I was supposed to do to stay healthy, to stay in good conditions as a therapist. I had a very nice family. I had small children at that time, a lot of friends, a lot of interests. I didn't take my work to my home. It was just as I should do, but anyway, still it happened to me. So I was interested in the process. What was happening there with me, with the depressive clients, that I got somehow infected by them? So this was my first question I had in mind, to focus on the therapist's own experience during the work. So my question in that time was how psychotherapists experience working with a depressive client. And I started a PhD research project on this topic. The next step was, I was too fast with the slides. Okay, here it is. Okay. Yes, anyway, I can... okay. And I can send you the presentation, or it will be available on EAGT Research Committee webpage. Yes. Okay. Lukáš. Okay. 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 So this was. I knew what I'm interested in, and then I needed to find out how to explore this phenomenon. So to go from the research question to research methodology, to choose a methodology that would help me answer this question. Because the experience of therapists is not so much explored phenomenon. Most of the research projects they focus on clients, how clients are depressive and how they get better or during the therapy or stay the same, or they focus on clients, and there is not so much research done on therapists, and especially not on their experiences during the session. So this is quite little explored phenomenon, and qualitative phenomenology, exploratory methodology is suitable for researching a topic which is not researched well yet. So, and then the next need, my need was to explore the process. I was interested in what happened there with me, with the clients, and how did it happen? So what was the process? Because in the beginning I was okay, and in the end I finished burned out and depressive myself, so I was interested in the process, what was happening there. And for exploring process, grounded theory method is very suitable, as you heard in the first part of the presentation.
Yes, that's my first clever note. You will recognize those clever inputs by the book. Yeah, it will have book always. So if it has a book, it's clever. So.
You mean that the others without the book?
The others have no book. Sorry. So reflexivity is a very important concept in methodology, and it's developed by Ken Evans and Linda Finley and many others, of course, also. Researchers' experience, knowledge, and values inevitably enter into the research process. And the more researchers are personally involved in the process or in the topic, the more they are prone to let their values sneak in the data creation, analysis, and they shape them according to their own understanding. So to kind of control this influence, at least to some degree, researchers need to develop their reflexivity, which means their ability to critically reflect their own stance, their own background, assumptions, and so on. However, we do not aim to totally eliminate the researcher's influence. Of course, we are speaking about qualitative methods, so this is not possible and this is not desirable because it's exactly the researcher who, through his or her own personal insights, conceptualizes the raw material of the data into theory. And another reason, which I have already mentioned, is that the research process in qualitative methods is time-consuming and energy-consuming. And the researcher has to have really, how to say it, really strong interest in the phenomenon to persist and to take it to the end. Yeah. It's not easy.
Yes, but a book should be there. It's your clever one. Okay. So how did I do it practically? I used the two-chair technique that we know very well from Fritz Perls already, and I was sitting on one chair and I was switching chairs, interviewing myself and asking about my experience with the depressive clients, how is it and what I think about it, and it ended into two interviews about 1.5 hours each, so it was quite a long and interesting experience for me. I was totally exhausted after the first one, but then and it really it had some impact personally for me, having this dialogue with myself. I realized only then how hard it was for me to work with them, with these kind of clients, and then it pushed me to make some changes, and then I made a second interview with myself, and it was not only auto-therapy, but it was also really getting into my preconceptions and my pre-understanding the topic, because then later when I did the analysis and also when I led the interviews, all this was driven by my preconceptions. They were there, present, so I needed to know about them before. So I used this two chairs technique, and it served for these three aims. One was mapping my own pre-understanding. The other aim was that I clarified the topic, and it became more clear for me, more focused, what I want to explore, and I also clarified useful questions that were productive, and I can use them later in interviewing other therapists. And then also I recorded this interview with myself and transcribed it, and later it served for the results validation. I'll tell you, it was one of the last steps. So these are just pieces of this my interview with myself. I felt like with him, with the client, I'm dull, kind of immobilized in my body, total inhibition. And in contact with him, I feel kind of tendency to close myself and to protect myself. And it seems dangerous to me to be pulled into his deep experience of hopelessness. So these were like some kind of my pre-understandings of the topic. So then I started to interview my colleague therapists, who I know that they had depressive clients. They practiced therapy with depressive clients, and I made 7 individual interviews with therapists. In the beginning, I asked them, imagine a session with your client who is currently depressive. And then I asked, what did you experience in that moment when you were sitting there with him or her? And then I was asking them to describe it in more details. How was your experience developing? What did you do? What was helpful for you? What happened next? And also I asked them to use metaphors to describe the client and the therapist. How would they look like, or what's the image that comes to the therapist's mind thinking about this relationship? So these interviews were transcribed, and I made open coding that you know already. So I put codes onto meaning units, and I wrote comments to the codes, and it helped me focus the research question. Because originally, you remember, the research question was how psychotherapists experience working with depressive clients. And during these interviews, I realized that there are in fact two questions, or two directions I can go further. One, therapists were describing how working with depressive clients impressed them over time, working for a long time with them. And the other one was what was happening with them in the session. So I had to decide, and I decided to focus only on the micro processes that were just happening here and now in the session. It looked more interesting to me as a Gestalt therapist. I felt more intrigued to it. And it was, as Tomáš said, it was very important for me to choose a topic which was interesting for me, because then I spent so many days and weeks and months analyzing that this interest was necessary. So, and important thing happened there, which is necessary for grounded theory, that slowly, among all the concepts, kind of central concept appeared, kind of concept that seemed to be more important, that was appearing as a figure, we can say, as Gestalt therapists. And it was a concept of experiential distance from a client, that the therapist described that they were they felt close to the client, or they felt far from the client emotionally, or coming close, or going away. So this concept of distance, emotional, experiential distance from client became a central concept for me.
Yeah, my book. Choosing a central concept is quite a late step in the grounded theory process. Jan has managed to formulate a preliminary central concept quite early in his analysis, but usually this is something that happens at the end. Central concept is an overarching concept which has a high explanatory power and which is closely related to many other, not all, but many other concepts which are created in the analysis. It may happen that you do your analysis and choose one of the concepts as a central concept, and then you work on the relationships. Or you may begin to feel that behind the set of concepts you have already created, there is something more general, more explaining, and you create it as a new but overarching concept. A central concept is a distinguishing feature of a grounded theory method. I don't think there is any other qualitative method that would aim to formulate a central concept. Yeah, for example, if you do thematic analysis, then the result is a list of themes. If you do If you do a narrative analysis, then the result may be a description of turning points in the narration or whatever. But if you do grounded theory, then you aim for a central concept. This is a principle which is not always applicated. You can see in journals, you can see articles which describe grounded theories without a central concept. But as a principle, it is described in the textbooks. And I think it's really useful to try to formulate a central concept so the theory can hold together.
So a next step for me was to get more data. I worked, as it is usual in grounded theory, the way that I made interview, I analyzed it, then I knew a bit more about it, about the topic, and then I made another interview, so which was more focused and more deep. So I got richer data. Then I analyzed it again, and again I could make another interview which was more deep, more focused, I asked for the things that were not that were missing in the previous interviews. So after making these 7 interviews, I was looking for some more data, and I organized 2 focus groups of therapists who were working with depressive clients, and I had 2 groups, one of 15 and one of 9 participants, and it was very rich discussion there. I gave them the same instruction. Imagine you are sitting with a depressive client and what you are experiencing here and now sitting with him or her. And then they were sharing their experiences, which was very, very nice in the focus group, that they were like reacting to each other and generating richer data, because they say, okay, yes, I know this too, but it's a bit different in my case. And then they say, no, this is, I don't do this, I do it differently. So I got a lot of data describing the details of the experience. Yes, and they describe not only their experiences, but also the coping strategies, what they do when they feel frustrated, for example, with the client, what they do with the frustration. And again, they discussed it in the group. Yes, let me see. Yes, here just the overview of this, of all my respondents I interviewed individually and in the focus groups. You can see that there were not all of them Gestalt therapists. It was a mixture of therapists, but all the therapists I interviewed individually were Gestalt therapists. So I come back a little bit, but then I will follow the next step. So the first step was open coding. When I'll just show you example, and this is the part of the text that you had also, and you tried your analysis before the break. So this is the part of the text you had, and maybe you can compare your codes and your comments to mine. So I was coding this only this one sentence, this one. I think that there were also some moments when it was that some kind of contact could happen. Yes, so I was coding this sentence, and the code was joining can lead to a contact. Yeah, I'm interested. What codes did you have? Can you name some? Joining. Yes. Something else? Change direction. Good. It fits the theory. You will see later. Yeah. Any other name? Pardon me? Back to? Back to contact. Okay, good. It's nice to hear it because it really fits the theory. Yes. Getting closer, yes. So you also use the central concept of experiential distance already. Yeah, I can hear it there. There's a question there. Yes, please. Oh, you don't like it. I just didn't hear you. What,
Ok. Le mot qui m'est venu, c'était creative indifference. I'm speaking French and I'm English. Talking a little.
But
Yeah, creative indifference.
yes,
That's what came
I
to me.
understood,
And
yes.
stop pushing the client.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, and then my comment to it was on what circumstances joining leads to a resignation and what circumstances it leads to a contact. Because it is not here, but there was another part of the interview where the therapist said, when I go close to the client, I'm overwhelmed by the helplessness and the depressive experience. So, and here also the therapist went closer to the client, but he was not overwhelmed. So, what's the difference? So this was my comment. And what circumstances joining leads to resignation, and what it leads to contact. And you see my note there that this is needed to be explored more in further interviews. So this was just for me to remember it. Yes.
Make these codes. Thank you. And you make these codes alone, or you have a co-analyst?
Yeah.
Or you discuss the process like we do it here? We did it in pairs.
Yes, both.
Because I find it very difficult.
Yes, I did it myself, and during the process I also discussed it with colleagues, and this is a big help for me that we have a research center at the university, so I could contact in different phases. Like most of the work I had to do myself, and it's really just sitting hours and days in front of the computer. But then when I got stuck, sometimes I went to consult it to my colleagues.
I've got a question. You told about theory.
Yes.
You've got a ground theory. I think about tips or something.
About?
How to code that sentence to joining can lead to a contact.
Yes.
From you've got a list or a
Yes.
theory. Tell something about it.
If I understand, I don't know if I understand you right, but if I do, if not, correct me. If I do, the theory will come. I had no theory in this time. It was just the grounded theory. It means that you have data, and the theory emerges from data. So I had no theory in this time. I'll show you how the theory. Maybe you can wait with the question later, because I'll show you how the theory was developing.
Just another question.
Yes.
Maybe it's my bias because I use the qualitative analysis for psychodrama, so I was arising emotions.
Good.
So in that sentence, for me, it was hope. But yes, because there was like. But I see that the concept, what you include in the codes, can have a range of from me to theory to both to. I see that there's I don't know whether there is a definition of what is expected to be in the code or what.
There are definitely many ways how to conceptualize these quotations, and none is completely right or completely wrong. It depends on the research question, and it depends on whether it takes you to a usable result. If not, then you should break your codes and start again.
Yes, and I can see it there too now. No, because when you said it, I became more sensitive to it, and now I can see it there. So that's what's happening during the process of analysis.
Different
yes.
routes? I said I was wondering because you need then to go different routes. You have different outcomes.
Yes,
probably.
of course, it does. It does. I develop theory which is inevitably, how to say it, formed by my view and my interpretations. Okay, so...
May I say something?
Yes,
well?
I didn't see you, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Can you put the slide back, please? Because on the first sentence that I'm joining the person, I think that's an act of empathy. And by mirroring somebody, I think we start to prickle the mirror neurons. And then you have confluence as a contact mechanism.
Great. So you are developing a theory already.
Oh yes, and
Great.
then but I think there were also some moments when it was that I concluded is that we have always contact.
Yes.
So
Great.
I think it confronts it with the despair of the therapist, where he is also in confluence with his client who is despairing all the time.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Okay.
It's this could be your comment to the code, yes? And you write down this comment, or in grounded theory sometimes we call it memo. You write this memo somewhere, and it's already a piece of a theory. And then you will see later in the process, we put all these pieces together, and they make one theory. So you're developing your own theory now.
Yes. I think your method is very useful because it keeps me thinking all the time.
Yes. Okay, so can I go on? Okay. It's adventure.
Maybe I can add something. This is a very beautiful example of how the things we already know influence what we see in the data. Yeah, so each of us will see something else. And it's okay. And there are two main approaches how to deal with that. One says everyone sees something else, and it's okay. Everyone can formulate their own theory, and then we can find out which theory is most useful. The other approach says you should not do that alone. There should be a group of people who should make consensus. So if 6 people say, yes, we can see this in this quotation, then they create the code. Yeah, so this is the principle of consensuality. And there is a kind of war between these two camps in qualitative methodology. The second one, emphasis on consensus. consensus, yes. Judge? You mean somebody who knows the truth? Or
Six persons to discuss, and the result is that correct meaning of a.
not correct, but agreed. It's
Competent judges. Some kind of experts who know.
yeah.
You know what
In the quantitative world, we would call it inter-rater reliability, if you know this term. So this is the same in qualitative. If people can agree on the meaning, then it's a shared meaning, and we can use it. Yeah.
I have another question. You were describing that after having had several interviews, your next interview changed, that enriched the data you were obtaining. I've coached a lot of students doing their research, and the problem was always that how to keep the focus on the original question they asked, because getting deeper data is very tempting to increase and enlarge what you are doing and forgetting what your original goal was. So how did you manage to do that?
I think this is very useful for me to have a therapeutic practice. So I have the skills of therapists, so I can keep the focus. It's just it's what we do every day with clients. We don't open it too wide because we need to finish in 50 minutes in some kind of closure, so the patient or the client is leaving some kind compensated, or yeah, there needs to be some kind of closure and focus. So this is quite natural for me to keep it focused. So I didn't have problems with that, but I can understand that students can have. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so I go on. So the next step was selective coding, as Tomasz has already explained before. In this part, I was coding larger segments of texts, and I was searching for the most important data. So I was not coding line on line everything, but I was just searching for the most important answers to these questions. How therapists responded experientially to depressive clients, what contributed to form their different reactions, how they did cope with their experiences, and what contributed to different ways of coping. So you can see these questions are more focused, more precise, and I was just looking for answers in the text. And I had several conceptual categories, like bigger categories. I'll show you later how they developed, and they were formed of subcategories, and I described qualities of the categories and dimensions. So here is an example of the selective coding. I have the same part of the text that you had also in front of you, and the code was ambivalence after stopping the effort to make a change. What are you laughing? Could you share it with us?
The ambivalence, and then polarity between activity and allowing for.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so, and my comment to this code was relief when she gives up the unproductive effort, and at the same time she keeps staying in the unpleasant experience. So this was a short comment, and then I made a memo, which is a kind of small part of a theory already. therapists, by this pushing for a change, is in fact escaping from the shared depressive experience. Only when she gives up this effort, she co-experiences intensively the depressive experience. So this was kind of theoretical thinking I had in that time. So, and I had many memos like that, and I was putting them together, as you could see the boxes Tomasz was showing in the beginning, and slowly they were forming kind of a structure. So now I'll show you some of the big categories. There was one very big category which was called being drawn in, when the therapists experience hopelessness, sadness, anxiety, fear of the client, body tension, immobility, heaviness, exhaustion, tiredness, all these feelings. And they realize that these feelings are connected to the situation, and they felt like being drawn into these feelings. And I made this kind of picture, and it is a picture that appeared, it's a metaphor for the relationship, for the therapeutic relationship, and it appeared in one of the focus groups. They were discussing how they feel with clients, and they said, one of them said, I feel like on a slippery slope, like falling down, being drawn down, being pulled down to the depressive client. And they played with the metaphor in the group, and they described it. So I used it for illustration of this category. And you can see some of the sentences they used. I like especially this one. I myself am losing sense of meaning after all that is happening with us there. So the therapist is really down there in the depressive experience with the client. They're saying, client is pulling me down. So this was one. The other one was, the other big category was polarizing. The therapists did not share the depressive experience of their clients, but they were more active, optimistic. They were trying to mobilize, to encourage the client. They were more directive than they were usually. And sometimes they refused to accept the client's experience. So, and these activities were kind of coping strategies for the therapists to handle their own experiences. And you can see it was like this. So they were quite far from, this also appeared in the focus group. They were quite far from the edge of the black hole, and they were sitting quite safely there, but they didn't see the client anymore. Yeah. I'm really angry to them. It was kind of feeling, if you would try, if you just want, you would overcome your depression if you try a bit more, things like that. Yeah. Oh. Or one of the therapists said, well, this is so terrible. I was just thinking this, I would never want it turns out with me this way. Yeah, so you can see they were really making big distance from the client. Okay.
Yeah, another chapter. What I have skipped in the first part of the presentation was looking for theoretical relationships among concepts. The boxes, the concepts are kind of building blocks and building stones of a theory, but we need some kind of glue to put them together. So this is why we need to define relationships among the concepts. Theoretical relationships. There can be many kinds of theoretical relationships. For example, hierarchical. One category can be seen as a special case, as a subcategory of another category. Or there can be causal relationships. Category A can be a condition or cause of category B, or category C can be a consequence of category B, and so on. The relationships can be perceptual. For example, you end up with category A, B, C, and you find out that they form stages of a process, or broadly speaking, they can be they can form a temporal sequence. So this is another kind of relationship among concepts. Or category A can be a means, category B can be a goal, another kind of relationship, and there can be probably other forms. This is a point of disagreement between different versions of grounded theory. In Glazer's approach, it's called theoretical coding, and he says there are 17 or 18 ways of connecting category. These are some of them. On the other hand, Straussian approach calls this actual coding, and he's more selective. He actually speaks only about the causal relationships. Yeah. No. So, no, first the joke, and sorry. First the joke, and then another slide. This is a statistical joke, so hopefully some of you will understand. Causality is always tricky, not only in qualitative research, but especially in qualitative research. We should not speak about causality in the hard meaning. When we ask people about causality, what we get is usually people's attributions of what causes something. So we should bear this in mind. This is the actual coding paradigm formulated by Strauss and Corbin. And they say that if you begin to connect categories with each other, then they take a form of either conditions of some phenomenon or some actions or interactions following and some consequences following the actions. So the phenomenon is something central in a situation, what's going there, what's happening there, and the conditions are something, some categories which serve as causes or as there's intervening conditions or contextual conditions, and so on. So if we are in the phases of actual coding, then we connect categories in this way. This is a general scheme which does not always apply perfectly to every situation. So we have modified this scheme to fit the situation of Jan's research.
As Tomáš said earlier in the first part, the grounded theory is the constant comparative method. So there's a movement from data to my developing concepts, and then back to data, comparing the concepts back if they fit the data, and then developing new concepts, and then back to data again. So I went back to data, and I selected 27 events that they described the session with the client. There were a lot of text, a lot of big parts of the interviews. They were only describing the client or describing the context, but I was looking only for the parts of the text where there was the description of the experience during the session. So I took this 27 events, and I used this paradigmatic model, which was a bit similar to the Straussian one, but this one was developed from our data, so it fitted well. And it was just explaining that there was a kind of situation with the depressive client. The therapist explained how the situation was. It was hard, it was demanding for me. And I was asking, what was your experience? And they said, well, I was feeling like helpless or restless in that situation. And then, what did you do with that? So I don't know. I just was aware of these feelings, and then they disappeared. So you can see this sequence: situation, experience in the situation, way of coping, and then the impact, how the situation got changed. And then again, the situation got changed, and the therapist experienced it somehow, and so on. So I used this paradigmatic model to analyze again these selected events, and there was a result was a basic sequence and its process variations, and I'll show you now. So the basic sequence was that the client and the therapists felt being drawn in to co-experiencing the depression, and they felt sorrow, helplessness, and they were trying to change the symptoms to get the client better, to pull him out of the depression. And then the situation didn't change. The client stayed depressive. And they experienced frustration. And then a turning point came, where, what you mentioned also in your short analysis. They turned back to the client, and they focused on the relationship. And they felt kind of relief and ambivalence at the same time. So this was kind of a provisional theoretical concept. You can see how the theory, like how the theory is emerging. I don't know, Lukáš, if this is in answering your question about theory, but maybe we come to it later. But this is, you can see how slowly it emerges, and it will develop more. So this is just how I analyzed each of the sequence, and I saw which phases were there in each sequence.
This is statistics.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. And then I developed a process model, which you can see here. And it was like you still can see the basic sequence there, but I combined the basic sequence of that you saw before with the experiential distance, moving close to client and far from the client. So you can see it make kind of curve then. Therapists felt being drawn in, depressive, and they felt that it's dangerous for them. So they turned from the client. They were trying to change the client to pull him out of the depression, but the situation stayed the same. So they were polarizing. They were getting angry to the client. They were distancing from the client until this turning point. And sometimes it was so extreme that one therapist said, I got so far from the client that I was just saying to myself, okay, he is so often talking about suicide, so probably it's really the best way for him to do it. Yeah, I can't help him, and he's talking so often about that, so why doesn't he do it? And then he said, then I realized what I'm thinking about, and it was kind of turning point for myself to stop and to look at the person again. So this was this turning point, and they focused back on the relationship, and they were somehow coping on the edge, not falling down into the black hole of depression and not being too distant from that. So this is the process model, and then I was searching for variants. So I went back to data again, and I compared this model with individual events, and I was looking for irregularities and differences and contradictions in the model. I removed 6 events from the analysis because they were incomplete, and I found there were 3 variants of this curve, of this trajectory. So this is the final model that we hope to be published in an article, and this is the final theory that got somehow and that is coherent, that all the pieces of theory, my comments, my memos from the analysis, they came together and they formed this kind of theory of the experiential movement, which I call the depression co-experiencing trajectory. And these are 3, okay. And these are the 3 variants. One was present in 13 events, and it was basically the same as the general one, with balanced, coming close to the client and far from the client. And I also found one example, one event which is illustrating well each variant. And the other type there were 4 events, and those were therapists that were only very mildly co-experiencing depression, and they were more distant. They were like coping it. They were observing the client from a distance, and they didn't come close. And then there was a third type, some therapists who did the opposite. They distanced only mildly, but they came very close to the client, co-experiencing depression with them, and coping it, not falling down into it. So, yeah. So I developed these 3 variants and illustrated them. So now I would like to show you how I analyzed one event. So you can use the event you have in front of you, the transcription, and I'll show you how the trajectory appeared there. I thought you might do it yourself. Maybe you can. But I've shown it to you already. Okay. Do you want to try it yourself or just hear it? What? Yeah. No, Tomasz doesn't want to work. Okay. But please look at the text, and we will go through the text. So, in the beginning, I'll skip this. In the beginning, the therapist said, I perceived it as difficult from the beginning. I had a question whether the therapy has a chance to succeed. So the therapist is doubting about herself, under-evaluating her abilities. So this is something which is also well known to depressive people. They underestimate their abilities. They're doubting themselves. So just in the beginning, she was like coming close to the experience of the client. And then she said, but on the other hand, it was like, I can try it and go for it. So there's kind of effort in it, some kind of hope, as you said, which is different from the depressive experience. So she's distancing from the client. And then she said, I felt a big burden. I felt bounded, helpless, such kind of immobilization, maybe numbness. Yeah, so you can clearly see how she got into the depressive mood, the co-experiencing the depression. And then, and I had such a life-saving tendency that I would like to help her somehow, to tell her that there is still something valuable, meaningful in her life, to pull her out of the depression. That there is something she can do and something she can get satisfaction out of it. something that she can still value. So these were all efforts to pull the client down, but at the same time there were coping strategies, how the therapist was coping with her own depressive feelings. So you can see this is the effort to change the symptoms, this phase. So she was moving away from the client experientially, and then again she felt, well, it's like in the garden. You're trying, nothing happens, and everything is spoiled again. There was no effect of the effort of the therapist. So she felt also something like helplessness. So she was coming close to the experience of the client again. And she also felt some anger in that time, yeah, to the client. So she was also distancing from the client. It was kind of self-protective anger, maybe. And then she said, I realized this, the anger, and I stopped going this way, going away from the client. So I just stopped, yeah, she said. And she says, I'm joining the person more, and I'm mirroring something. I stopped making her to move. Instead, I rather join her. So you see, she's focusing on the relationship now, and she's coming close to the client now. Well, but this mostly ended in such a resignation. So again, she was too close to the client and resigned. So, and it's a relief also. So she's not completely depressive. She also feels some kind of relief from that activity, sitting in something nasty. So you see how she's balancing. They also called it balancing on the edge of the depressive, of the black hole. So she was kind of balancing on the edge. So this is just to show you how I analyzed each of the events and using the general sequence model. Yeah.
Why have we put it here? Okay. Okay. Grounded theory is typical by a continuous data creation and continuous sampling. The phases of data creation and analysis are not separated. Yeah, as soon as you start collecting data, you start doing analysis, and the results of the initial analysis inform further data creation. So these are the circles I was showing you on one of the first slides. But the logic of sampling becomes different. In the beginning, we do a kind of field mapping. We create our first concepts. We create our mental map of the field or of the phenomenon, and we do not know much about what's going on. So we choose people based on their availability, and I call it expected utility. We can ask ourselves, who will tell me most about something? Yeah? But in later phases, we have our map, and we know what's missing, or what should be elaborated, or what's not so firm, so we need to confirm something. So in later phases, the data collection and the sampling strategy follows from the major concepts and their dimensions. The question is how long we do this. How long should we go on and collect another data and analyze and refine our theory? So there is a basic rule. It's called principle of theoretical saturation. And in basic English it says, if you do another interview, it gives you information which you already know, and it does not help you to develop your concepts because it's already there in the theory, then you have reached theoretical saturation. Your theory, your concepts are saturated. We also do not want to do this forever because there's a principle of parsimony. The theory is better if it has fewer concepts. It's like in quantitative models, the fewer variables you need to explain a phenomenon, the better the model is. So here it's the same. The less concepts we need to explain what's going on, the better the theory is. Yes.
So the next step we did is called theoretical sampling in
maybe I should, sorry.
Yes.
This is what I did not say. The logic of sampling is called theoretical sampling because it follows from the theory. Yeah? From the theory we create. This is why it's called theoretical sampling. It's the opposition of random sampling, for example. So we do not select our participants randomly, but we select those who will fill the blank spaces in our theory.
So this is what I did in my research, because until now I had respondents who were mainly humanistic, experiential oriented, and psychodynamic, psychoanalytical oriented. So I was curious what therapists who is not so much working with the relationship, who is not so much focused on the relationship, how this therapist would experience therapy with depressive client. Because we have now working with symptoms is one of the phases, one of the coping strategies. So I was curious, what about CBT therapists who do not work with the relationship explicitly, and and their main tool is to change symptoms. So I was curious about this. So I made another interview, an additional one with a CBT therapist, and yeah, and it was very interesting because it was very experienced therapist and very pure in the CBT approach. He was like very devoted to CBT, and so when he was describing his thoughts, it was very different from our thinking about therapy. But when I was asking him about his personal experiences during the therapy, it was the same. He was experiencing exactly the same. He had some different coping strategies, like, for example, as we saw, the balancing on the edge. Like the experiential therapists, like Gestalt therapists, they used their self-awareness a lot. They were aware of their experiences in the here and now, and they were grounded in their body. So it helped them to stand on the edge, to balance on the edge. The CBT therapist was more thinking about the how they call it, the wrong thoughts or irrational thoughts of himself. Like he said, in that moment I realized I'm thinking that this therapy has no chance to be successful, and that it will be forever like this. And then he said, well, this is an irrational thought. So let's work with it. So it's not that it's for all of us, it's just now. And then he was working with this thought as he was used to work with the clients. But it was the only difference. The coping strategy was different, but the experiences were the same. So this additional interview didn't brought anything new to the model. And so we could conclude that we came to the theoretical saturation. And I did one more step that after this interview with the CBT therapist, I showed him the model just to compare it with his experience. How does it fit to his experience? And he said that basically it fits for the clients that are really depressive here and now and are not in the phase of getting better. Then it's different. But for the phase when they are really depressive, it fits. Yeah, this is your
my chapter. And this, we are close to the end of our presentation, and I can ask a rhetorical question. Do you believe us? Was this story credible? Yeah, and this is what we should ask at the end of, not at the end, during.
Maybe you
research.
should wait for the answer.
I will rather continue. In quantitative research, we speak about validity. In qualitative, it's more usual to speak about credibility or trustworthiness of the results. And there are several aspects or ways of achieving or demonstrating the credibility. One of them is thorough description of the research process, of every step that has been taken. Another way is showing that your data are really grounded in your results are really grounded in the data. Yet another is the way you transfer the results. It should be comprehensible. Yeah, in other words, that you really understand what Jan means by his categories and his descriptions. And that resonates in you, in your experience. This is the resonance as a criterion of credibility. And there is a principle of consensuality, that people really can agree on this interpretation of data. There is a discussion about whether results need to be reached in this consensual way or whether individual interpretations are allowed. And this conflict is represented on various places or between various people in the world of qualitative research. No laughing, so you can go on.
Okay, so we are really coming to the end. So this is the one of the final steps where we have the model, which is already finished. The theory is developed, and we are validating it, checking if it fits, if the theory is well grounded. So we did several steps to validate it. The first one was self-reflection of the therapist that I told you in the beginning. I made this two-chair interview with me, which was recorded, and then now in this phase I gave it to Tomáš, and he, as the second researcher, he read it and he compared it with the results. And he was looking if there was something new that appeared during the analysis, or if I just used the data to confirm my opinion that I had in the beginning. Yeah. So this was one of the checks. And yeah, he found that I came to something new. Also, the model was validated by repeated analysis. After each step, I went back to data and saw if the theoretical concepts I'm developing fit the data, and then I developed next step. I employed theoretical sampling. It means including the additional interview with the CBT therapist. And I followed the principle of theoretical saturation. I also presented the model to a CBT therapist, as I told you. And and this was the last thing I did. I took this model and I presented it in the Cape Cod conference, where Phil was speaking about it. Last year there was a Gestalt research conference in Cape Cod, and I presented this model there, and I had a focus group for 1 hour with all the experienced therapists there to discuss their experiences and to compare it with the model, if it fits. And it did. Yeah, and with some remarks, which were very useful for us because we use them in the discussion of the model when writing article. We use their points to discuss the model. And yes, auditor, analyst. This was also an important step that Thomas took the transcripts of the events and the description of the trajectory, as I showed you. And he looked at the original data and at the model, and he was trying to make his own understanding the process, or he was trying to see if it fits, yeah, basically this. So, and now we are getting to the end. Unfortunately, not a happy end yet. There is not a journal article already published. I would be happy to present it as a nice ending. But we are working hard on the article. The main problem is that it's too long, so we are just shortening it, and it pushes us to make the model and the theory as simple as possible. So it's very useful. Yeah.
Now it has only 50 pages.
Only, yeah, but we need about half of it. Yeah. And
it's a success. It had 75 pages.
Okay, so we want to present the results in a short, simple, and stupid way. We want to, and we need to illustrate the theory well by quotations, so it's visible, it's clear that it's well grounded in data, and we need to describe the methodological procedure well, as you could see it here, and we also need to go to make a survey of literature and to explain why this research is needed, what was missing until now. And we need to discuss findings with existing empirical and theoretical literature. And we also need to acknowledge limits of this research and suggest some possible further ways to go on. So for example, one limit, okay, Jan is writing to me, sorry. One of the limits of the situation. I should stop. Okay, he's writing to me that I should stop. Okay, so one of the limits was that I made the interview sometime after the therapy. So the therapists were just remembering what was happening some time ago in the therapy. So inevitably, their memories were influenced by their wishes or by forgetting the bad things from therapy, or it was influenced by the time distance from the therapy. So another one improvement for future research, which is also used in similar researches, is that the therapy session is recorded, video recorded, and I make the interview with the therapist while watching the therapy session. So we can stop in several places and ask, what were you experiencing in this exact moment, and what then? So this could be one way to do it. Another way would be to include a client also, and to make interview with the client also watching the record of the therapy, and then compare both, and to make this model more relational. So these are thoughts. We could also use task analysis, a method developed by Leslie Greenberg, very well for the future research. So. A conclusion for me, I come back to my personal story that I started with. It appeared to me that doing a research is kind of coping strategy for me, that it helps me helps me get to get enthusiastic again. And I like working with depressive clients again. It helps, but doing research was kind of, yeah, as I said, a way of coping with my own experiences. And it is also kind of burnout prevention for me, because now the topic is interesting for me. I'm looking forward. When there's a depressive client is coming to me, I'm looking forward. What would happen with me, with him? Yeah, so this is very different. It is a kind of self-support for me, because when I share it with my colleagues, and also when I read literature, I can see that I'm not alone, that I'm not the only stupid or very so vulnerable, sensitive therapist who got depressed working with depressive clients, but I can see that there are many of us, which helps. And I also found kind of professional community support. Talking about this research with colleagues, I found that this is a topic which is shared, and they don't talk about that openly, but when I open the topic, they want to share it and they want to collaborate on the research. So this is also support for me. Oh, yeah.
And this is the end. One of my qualitative colleagues once wrote me in an email that grounded theory is like a big fish, one which is told about in stories, but no one has caught it. So I think Jan managed to catch this kind of big fish.
Okay. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jan and Tomasz. It was very inspiring presentation, and I thought you were very involved. So thank you again very much. It was very, very good. I think that now we don't have time for actually we have 2 minutes if someone wants to say something after this presentation. Some questions, some reflection. Yes, Ken? Uh-huh. You need this? No. Yes. They want to hear you.
Is more demanding and more difficult than quantitative research. I appreciate the rigor with which you did this. And it's not that qualitative research has been tried and found insufficient. It's tried and found too difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. And I also want to thank you for teaching me qualitative research methodology, because you were the first teacher and you're, for me, and you also brought me to grounded theory method. Thank you.